The morning sun felt warm on my face as I walked through the farmer's market, my canvas bag already heavy with fresh vegetables. At 67, these Tuesday morning trips had become my favourite routine. The smell of ripe tomatoes and fresh bread always reminded me of happier times when Clara would come with me, chattering about her week while we picked out ingredients for Sunday dinner. I was examining a particularly beautiful bunch of carrots when a young man approached me. He looked nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder as he walked closer. His delivery uniform was wrinkled, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Excuse me," he said quietly, his voice shaking slightly. "Are you Clara's mother, Margaret Thompson?" My heart skipped a beat. Nobody had mentioned my daughter's name in months. "Yes, I am. Why do you ask?" The young man reached into his jacket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. It was about the size of a jewellery box tied with ordinary string. His hands trembled as he held it out to me. "This is yours now," he whispered, looking around nervously again. "She wanted you to have it. But you need to open it alone, okay? Very important that you open it alone." Before I could ask any questions, he pressed the package into my hands and started walking away quickly. I called after him, but he disappeared into the crowd of shoppers, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding and 1,000 questions racing through my mind. The package felt heavier than it should have for its size. I turned it over in my hands, looking for any clues about where it came from or what might be inside. There was no return address, no markings of any kind, just brown paper and string like something from an old movie. I abandoned my shopping and hurried to my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Once inside, I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the package. The delivery man's words echoed in my head. She wanted you to have it. Who was she? And why did he look so frightened? With trembling fingers, I untied the string and carefully unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a small cardboard box, the kind you might get from a jewellery store. I lifted the lid slowly, not knowing what to expect. What I saw inside made my blood turn to ice. Clara's wedding ring sat in the centre of the box, the diamond catching the sunlight streaming through my windshield. Next to it was a piece of torn fabric that I recognised immediately. It was from her favourite blue dress, the one she wore to family dinners. The fabric was dirty and had what looked like dried blood on one corner. But it was the folded piece of paper underneath that made me gasp out loud. I unfolded it with shaking hands and saw my daughter's handwriting, messy and desperate. "Help me, Mom. He's not who you think he is. I'm running out of time. Trust no one except the person who gave you this. Antonio has been lying to you about everything. I never went overseas. I'm still here, and I'm in terrible danger. Please find me before it's too late." The paper slipped from my fingers as the world started spinning around me. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. For 2 years, Antonio had been telling me that Clara was working overseas, that she couldn't contact me because of her job's security requirements. He brought me letters supposedly from her, gifts he claimed she had sent, even played voicemails on his phone that he said were from her. But here was her wedding ring, the ring she never took off, not even to shower. Here was a piece of her dress torn and bloodied. And here was a note in her own handwriting telling me she was in danger and had never left town at all. My mind raced back over the past 2 years, remembering all the times something felt wrong about Antonio's explanations. How he always seemed nervous when I asked about Clara. How he never let me keep the letters she supposedly sent. How he always had an excuse for why I couldn't visit her or why she couldn't call me directly. I looked at the ring again, and that's when I noticed something else. There was a small scratch on the inside of the band that hadn't been there before. I held it up to the light and could barely make out what looked like numbers etched into the gold. 47B. Sitting in my car in the farmer's market parking lot, holding my daughter's wedding ring and a piece of her torn, bloodied dress, I realised that everything I had believed for the past 2 years was a lie. My daughter hadn't been living her dream job overseas. She had been somewhere close by, in danger, trying desperately to get a message to me. And now, finally, she had found a way. I carefully placed everything back in the box and started my car with shaking hands. I had to think clearly about what to do next. If Antonio had been lying about Clara being overseas, what else had he been lying about? And if my daughter was really in danger, who could I trust to help me find her? The delivery driver's words came back to me. Trust no one except the person who gave you this. But he had disappeared into the crowd before I could get his name or ask him any questions. How was I supposed to find him again? As I drove home, my mind was spinning with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. What had happened to my daughter? Where was she now? And what did Antonio have to do with her disappearance? One thing was certain. I couldn't go to Antonio with this information. If Clara was right, and he wasn't who I thought he was, then showing him this package could put her in even more danger. I was on my own, at least for now. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a few more minutes, trying to process everything that had just happened. My quiet Tuesday morning at the farmer's market had turned into the beginning of what felt like a nightmare, but it was also the first real hope I'd had in 2 years that my daughter might still be alive. I looked at the box one more time before getting out of the car. Whatever was happening, whatever danger Clara was in, I was going to find her. I was her mother, and I wasn't going to let anyone hurt my little girl, no matter how scared I was, or how impossible the situation seemed. The numbers 47B scratched inside her ring had to mean something. It was a clue, a breadcrumb she had left for me to follow. And I was going to follow it, no matter where it led. I remember the exact moment my world started falling apart, though I didn't know it at the time. It was a Thursday evening in March 2 years ago. I was making my famous pot roast, the one Clara always begged me to cook when she came for dinner. The table was set for 3 and I kept glancing at the clock, wondering why she and Antonio were running late. When Antonio finally arrived, he was alone. His face looked serious, almost sad, as he sat down at my kitchen table. I immediately knew something was wrong. "Where's Clara?" I asked, wiping my hands on my apron. "Is she parking the car?" Antonio shook his head slowly. "Maggie, I need to tell you something important. Clara got a job offer yesterday, a really big one." I felt a flutter of excitement. Clara had been looking for a new position for months, something that would challenge her marketing skills. "That's wonderful. What kind of job?" "It's with an international consulting firm," Antonio explained, his voice careful and measured. "They want her to lead a project overseas. It's exactly the kind of opportunity she's been dreaming about." The excitement in my chest started to fade. "Overseas? For how long?" "That's the thing," Antonio said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "It could be a year, maybe 2. And because of the nature of the work, it involves some sensitive business deals. She won't be able to communicate much while she's there." I stared at him, trying to process what he was telling me. "What do you mean, she won't be able to communicate? She can't call her own mother." Antonio's grip on my hand tightened slightly. "The company has very strict security policies. No personal phone calls, no social media, very limited email contact. I know it sounds extreme, but the pay is incredible, and it could set up her entire career." Something felt wrong about this explanation, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. "When does she leave?" "Tomorrow morning," Antonio said quietly. "She wanted to come tell you herself, but she's been packing all day and getting her paperwork in order. She asked me to give you this." He pulled out an envelope with my name written on it, in what looked like Clara's handwriting. Inside was a letter explaining everything Antonio had just told me, along with an apology for leaving so suddenly and a promise to write when she could. I read the letter 3 times, looking for something that felt like my daughter's voice. The words were right, but something about the tone seemed off. Clara usually wrote with more emotion, more of her personality shining through. This letter felt formal, almost like a business document. "She's really leaving tomorrow?" I asked, still holding the letter. Antonio nodded. "I'm driving her to the airport early in the morning. She wanted me to tell you how much she loves you and how sorry she is that this opportunity came up so suddenly." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about how strange it was that Clara hadn't come to tell me herself. We talked about everything together. When she got engaged, I was the first person she called. When she was thinking about changing jobs, we spent hours discussing the pros and cons. It wasn't like her to make such a huge decision without talking to me first. The next morning I called her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again in the afternoon and the same thing happened. By evening, the number was disconnected entirely. When I asked Antonio about it, he explained that the company had given Clara a new phone with international service, and for security reasons, she couldn't give out the number. He promised to pass along any messages I wanted to send. For the first few weeks, Antonio would stop by every Sunday with updates. He'd tell me about emails Clara had sent him, describing her new apartment and her interesting work. He even showed me pictures on his phone that he said Clara had sent, photos of beautiful European buildings and fancy restaurants. But I never got to see the actual emails. Antonio always said he'd accidentally deleted them or that his phone was acting up. When I asked if I could send Clara a care package, he told me the company handled all mail delivery and it was too complicated to arrange. After a month, I started getting letters. They came every few weeks, always with foreign postmarks, always in envelopes with Clara's handwriting. The letters talked about her work, the people she was meeting, and how much she missed home. They sounded more like Clara than that first letter had, but something still felt off. I saved every letter, reading them over and over, trying to figure out what was bothering me about them. Finally, I realized what it was. Clara never mentioned specific details about where she was or what she was actually doing. The letters were full of general descriptions that could have applied to any city in Europe. When I mentioned this to Antonio, he laughed and said Clara had always been vague about work stuff, even when she lived here. He reminded me that she couldn't share details because of her confidentiality agreement. As the months went by, I started noticing other strange things. Clara's car never moved from their driveway. When I asked Antonio about it, he said they were keeping it for when she came back, and he was starting it occasionally to keep the battery charged. Her social media accounts went completely silent. Not just no new posts, but it was like she had vanished from the internet entirely. Antonio explained that the company had very strict policies about online presence while employees were working on sensitive projects. I tried to stay positive and supportive. I sent messages through Antonio, telling Clara how proud I was of her and how much I missed her. He always promised to pass them along and would sometimes share her responses, but I never got to hear her voice or see her words myself. The holidays were the hardest part. Clara had never missed Christmas or Thanksgiving with me, not once since she'd been an adult. Antonio brought gifts he said were from Clara, beautiful scarves and jewelry that looked expensive. But they didn't feel like things Clara would choose. She knew I preferred simple, practical gifts, not fancy accessories. When I asked if Clara might be able to call on Christmas morning just for a few minutes, Antonio looked genuinely sad. He said he'd asked her the same thing, but the company was very strict about communication blackouts during the holidays for security reasons. By the 1-year mark, I was starting to feel desperate. I missed my daughter terribly, and the whole situation felt increasingly strange. I started asking Antonio more pointed questions about exactly where Clara was working and what kind of project could possibly require such extreme secrecy. His answers became more elaborate but somehow less convincing. He talked about international trade agreements and corporate espionage, using big words that sounded impressive but didn't really explain anything. When I pressed for more details, he would get frustrated and remind me that he was just passing along what Clara had told him. The letters kept coming, but they started feeling more and more generic. Clara wrote about missing my cooking and wanting to come home, but she never mentioned specific memories we shared or asked about specific people in our neighborhood. It was like someone was writing letters based on a general idea of what a daughter might say to her mother, without really knowing either of us. I started paying closer attention to Antonio during his visits. He seemed nervous whenever I asked direct questions about Clara. He would fidget with his phone or change the subject quickly. Sometimes he would contradict things he had told me in previous visits, then act like I had misunderstood. The breaking point came about 18 months after Clara had supposedly left. I was at the grocery store when I ran into her best friend from college, who was visiting town. She asked how Clara was doing with her new job, and I started telling her about the overseas assignment. The friend looked confused. What overseas assignment? I just saw Clara's LinkedIn profile last week, and it still says she works at her old company here in town. I felt my stomach drop. When I got home, I tried to look up Clara's LinkedIn profile myself, but I couldn't find it anywhere. It was like it had been deleted entirely. That night, I confronted Antonio about what Clara's friend had said. He got angry for the first time since this whole thing started, telling me that Clara's friend was obviously mistaken or lying. He said some people were jealous of Clara's success and might try to cause trouble. But his reaction scared me. The Antonio I had known for 4 years was always calm and patient, even when I asked the same questions over and over. This angry, defensive version of him felt like a stranger. After that confrontation, his visits became less frequent. Instead of coming every Sunday, he would stop by every few weeks, always with an excuse about being busy with work or dealing with some crisis at home. The letters from Clara also became more sporadic. I started keeping a journal, writing down everything Antonio told me and comparing it to what he had said before. The inconsistencies were becoming impossible to ignore. Dates didn't match up, details changed from visit to visit, and his explanations for Clara's continued absence were getting more and more far-fetched. But what could I do? I had no way to contact Clara directly, no way to verify anything Antonio was telling me. I was completely dependent on him for any information about my daughter, and that dependence was starting to feel like a trap. The worst part was the growing certainty that something terrible had happened to Clara, and Antonio was the only person who knew what it was. But I had no proof, no evidence, nothing but a mother's intuition that something was very, very wrong. I never imagined that the proof I needed would come in the form of a nervous delivery driver at the farmer's market carrying a package that would shatter every lie Antonio had carefully constructed over the past 2 years. The package sat on my kitchen table like a bomb waiting to explode. I had been staring at it for 3 hours, Clara's wedding ring catching the afternoon light every time I moved. The note with her desperate handwriting was burned into my memory. He's not who you think he is. I knew I couldn't go to Antonio with this. If Clara was right about him, showing him the package would be like signing her death warrant. But I also couldn't just sit here doing nothing while my daughter was somewhere out there, in danger and counting on me to find her. I made a decision that terrified me. I was going to search their house. Antonio worked construction management, which meant he was usually on job sites from 7 in the morning until at least 5 in the evening. It was Tuesday afternoon, which gave me a few hours before he might come home. I had a spare key to their house that Clara had given me years ago for emergencies. I had never used it without permission before, but this definitely qualified as an emergency. My hands shook as I unlocked their front door. The house felt different somehow, like it was holding secrets. Everything looked normal on the surface. The same furniture Clara had picked out, the same wedding photos on the mantel, the same throw pillows she loved to rearrange. But as I looked closer, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. There was a thin layer of dust on Clara's favourite coffee mug, the one she used every morning. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand next to her side of the bed, but Clara was practically blind without them. She would never have travelled overseas without taking them. I went to their bedroom and opened Clara's closet. All her clothes were still there, hanging exactly as she had left them. Her suitcases were stacked on the top shelf, covered in dust. If she had really taken a job overseas, Wouldn't she have packed at least some of her belongings? In the bathroom, her toothbrush was still in the holder, bone dry. Her prescription medications were still in the medicine cabinet, including her daily vitamins that she never missed taking. I checked the dates on the bottles. Several of them had expired months ago, which meant they hadn't been refilled since she supposedly left. The more I searched, the more convinced I became that Clara had never left this house voluntarily. But if she hadn't left, where was she? And what had Antonio done with her? I was about to check the kitchen when I noticed something strange about the basement door. There was a new deadbolt lock on it, the kind that required a key from both sides. In all the years I had visited this house, the basement had never been locked. Clara used to do laundry down there, and she kept her Christmas decorations in storage boxes on the shelves. I tried the door handle, but it was locked tight. The new lock looked expensive and heavy-duty. Not the kind of thing you'd install just to keep people out of a basement. It looked more like the kind of lock you'd use to keep someone in. My heart was pounding as I searched for a key. I checked all the obvious places: the kitchen junk drawer, the key hooks by the front door, the top of the refrigerator. Nothing. Then I remembered that Antonio kept a toolbox in the garage. Maybe he had hidden a spare key there. The garage was cluttered with construction equipment and tools. Antonio's toolbox was a large red metal chest with multiple drawers. I felt guilty going through his personal belongings, but I kept thinking about Clara's note and the desperation in her handwriting. In the bottom drawer, underneath some old work gloves, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a cell phone. But not the one Antonio usually carried. This one was older, with a cracked screen, and when I turned it on, it was full of text messages. The messages were between Antonio and someone named Rico. They talked about taking care of problems and keeping things quiet. One message from 3 months ago made me feel sick. The package is getting restless. Might need to move to permanent storage soon. Another message from Rico sent just last week. Boss is asking questions. You sure she can't identify anyone? Antonio's response: she's seen too much. We'll have to make it look like an accident. I screenshot the messages with my own phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely operate the camera. At the bottom of the toolbox, wrapped in an old rag, I found a key that looked like it might fit the basement lock. I hurried back into the house, constantly checking the time. It was almost 4 o'clock, which meant Antonio could be home within the hour. I had to see what was in that basement, even though every instinct was screaming at me to run. The key fit perfectly. I opened the door and flipped on the light switch, then slowly walked down the wooden stairs. The basement looked different than I remembered. The laundry area was still there, but the far end of the room had been sectioned off with new drywall. Behind the new wall, I found a small room that made my stomach turn. There were chains bolted to the concrete wall with metal cuffs that looked like they had been used recently. The floor had been scrubbed with bleach so thoroughly that the concrete was actually lighter in some spots, but I could still see dark stains that looked like they might be blood. In one corner, I found a pile of Clara's clothes: her favourite jeans, the sweater I had given her for her birthday, underwear and socks that I recognised from doing her laundry when she was younger. Everything was dirty and torn, like it had been cut off rather than removed normally. But the most heartbreaking discovery was a small notebook hidden behind a loose brick in the wall. I opened it and immediately recognised Clara's handwriting, but it was shaky and desperate, nothing like her usual neat script. The first entry was dated 2 years ago, just a few days after Antonio had told me she left for her overseas job. He's been putting something in my food for weeks. I thought I was just getting sick, but now I know he was drugging me. When I confronted him about the missing money from our account, he lost it completely. He told me I knew too much about his business, and now I can never leave. I flipped through more pages, each entry more terrifying than the last. He moved me to the basement today, says it's temporary until he figures out what to do with me. I tried to scream, but the neighbours can't hear anything down here. Rico came by today. They were talking about other women. Other packages they've moved. I think Antonio is involved in something much bigger than I realized. I heard them planning to move me somewhere else next week, a place where no one will ever find me. I have to find a way to get a message to Mom before it's too late. The last entry was dated 3 months ago. The delivery boy saw me through the window today when they moved me to the warehouse. I managed to slip him my ring and a note. I pray he's brave enough to get it to Mom. If anyone can save me, it's her. I was crying as I read Clara's words, imagining the terror she must have felt, trapped in this horrible room while Antonio lied to me about her being overseas. But I was also filled with a fierce determination. My daughter was still alive. At least she had been 3 months ago, and she was counting on me to find her. I took pictures of everything: the chains, the bloodstains, the notebook, Clara's torn clothes. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I had found it. I couldn't let Antonio know that I had discovered his secret. As I locked the basement door and put the key back in the toolbox, I heard a car pulling into the driveway. My heart nearly stopped. Antonio was home early. I quickly let myself out the back door and hurried to my car, which I had parked 2 blocks away. As I drove home, my mind was racing with everything I had discovered. Antonio wasn't just lying about Clara being overseas, he was holding her prisoner, and from the text messages, it sounded like he was planning to kill her soon. But I still didn't know where she was now. The notebook mentioned a warehouse, and the delivery driver had found her there 3 months ago. But Antonio and his partner Rico had talked about moving her to permanent storage, which sounded ominous. I needed to find that delivery driver. He was the only person who had actually seen Clara recently, and according to her note, he was the only person I could trust. But how was I supposed to track down one delivery driver in a city of thousands? Then I remembered something. When he approached me at the farmer's market, he was wearing a uniform. I tried to picture it in my mind. It was blue with some kind of logo on the chest. If I could figure out which delivery company he worked for, maybe I could find him. I spent the rest of the evening going through my memory of that morning, trying to recall every detail about the nervous young man who had handed me the package that changed everything. Tomorrow, I would start calling delivery companies. I would find him, and together we would find Clara before Antonio could carry out whatever horrible plan he was making. My daughter was still alive, and I was going to bring her home. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Clara's handwriting in that notebook, shaky and desperate. By 5 a.m, I gave up trying to rest and started making coffee. I had a plan, and I needed to start executing it immediately. I spent the early morning hours calling every delivery company in the phone book: FedEx, UPS, DHL, and a dozen smaller local companies. I told each one the same story, that a delivery driver had helped me when I fell at the farmer's market, and I wanted to thank him properly. I described him as best I could. Young Asian man, about 28, nervous demeanor, working Tuesday morning routes. Most of the companies were polite but unhelpful, citing privacy policies. But on my 9th call, to a company called Metro Express Delivery, the dispatcher paused when I gave my description. "That sounds like Tommy," she said. "Tommy Chen. He's one of our Tuesday morning drivers, covers the downtown and market district routes. Sweet kid, but he's been acting real jumpy lately. Is he in some kind of trouble?" My heart raced. "No trouble at all. I just wanted to thank him. Would it be possible to get his contact information?" The dispatcher hesitated. "I can't give out personal information, but I can tell you he usually takes his lunch break at Murphy's Diner on 5th Street around noon. He's there most days, sits in the back booth and reads while he eats." I thanked her and hung up, then spent the rest of the morning pacing around my house, watching the clock. At 11:30, I drove to Murphy's Diner and parked across the street where I could watch the entrance. At 12:15, I saw him, the same nervous young man who had approached me at the farmer's market, still wearing his blue Metro Express uniform. He looked around carefully before entering the diner, like he was checking to see if anyone was following him. I waited 5 minutes, then went inside. The diner was busy with the lunch crowd, but I spotted him immediately in a back booth, just as the dispatcher had said. He was picking at a sandwich while reading a paperback book, but his eyes kept darting toward the windows. I approached his table slowly, not wanting to startle him. When he looked up and saw me, his face went pale. "Please don't run," I said quietly, sliding into the booth across from him. "I need to talk to you about my daughter." Tommy's hands were shaking as he put down his book. "I shouldn't have given you that package. I've been thinking about it for days and I think I made a mistake. This is dangerous stuff, lady." "My name is Maggie," I said, keeping my voice calm and gentle, "and you didn't make a mistake. You may have saved my daughter's life, but I need you to tell me everything you know." He looked around the diner nervously, then leaned forward and lowered his voice. "I can't get involved in this. You don't understand what kind of people we're dealing with here." I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the photos I had taken in Antonio's basement, the chains bolted to the wall. "This is what I found in my son-in-law's basement yesterday. My daughter has been held prisoner for 2 years while he told me she was working overseas. You're the only person who's actually seen her. Please, I'm begging you to help me." Tommy stared at the photo, his face growing even paler. He was quiet for a long moment, then finally spoke. "3 months ago, I was making a delivery to this warehouse on the east side of town. Industrial area, lots of abandoned buildings. The address was 47 Riverside Drive, Unit B. My heart jumped. The numbers scratched inside Clara's ring. 47B. She had been trying to tell me the address. "I was supposed to drop off some packages at the loading dock," Tommy continued. "But when I got there, I heard screaming coming from inside the building, a woman's voice calling for help." He paused and took a shaky sip of his coffee. "I should have called the police right then, but I was curious and stupid. I walked around the building looking for a window or something just to see what was going on." "And you saw Clara?" Tommy nodded. "There was this small window up high on the side wall. I had to climb on some crates to look through it. Inside, I saw this woman chained to a pipe. She was bruised up pretty bad, and her clothes were torn. When she saw me at the window, she started crying and begging me to help her. I felt tears starting in my eyes, imagining my daughter in that horrible situation." "What did she say to you?" "She told me her name was Clara, and that her mother's name was Maggie Thompson. She said a man named Antonio was holding her prisoner, and that he'd been telling people she was overseas. She begged me to find you and tell you she was still alive." Tommy reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. "She also gave me this. Said if anything happened to her, I should make sure you got it." I unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It was another note in Clara's handwriting, but this one was different from the one that came with her ring. "Mom, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. Antonio is involved with people who traffic women. I found out about it by accident when I saw some documents he left out. That's why he had to silence me. There are other women being held in different locations around the city. The man in charge is someone named Vincent Morales. He owns several warehouses and shipping containers down by the docks. Antonio works for him. Please go to the police, but be careful who you trust. Some of them might be involved too. I love you. Clara." I read the note 3 times, my hands shaking. "When did she give you this?" "Same day I saw her through the window. She managed to slip it to me along with her ring when the guards weren't looking. But here's the thing. When I went back to that warehouse a week later, she was gone. The whole place was cleaned out, like nobody had ever been there." My heart sank. "Do you have any idea where they might have moved her?" Tommy was quiet for a moment, then leaned even closer. "This is the part that's been eating at me. 2 weeks after I saw your daughter, I was making deliveries down by the shipping docks. I saw the same guy who was guarding her at the warehouse, big guy with a scar on his neck. He was loading women into a shipping container." "Women? How many?" 3 or 4, I think. They were all chained together, and they looked like they'd been drugged or something. I couldn't see their faces clearly, but one of them had long dark hair like your daughter. I felt like I was going to be sick. Did you see which container they put them in? Container 47B, Tommy said. Same numbers that were on the warehouse unit. I think this Vincent guy uses those numbers for all his operations. The pieces were starting to come together. Clara had scratched 47B inside her ring because that's where she was being held. First at the warehouse, then at the shipping container facility. Where exactly are these containers? I asked. Tommy pulled out his phone and showed me a map. Riverside Shipping Yard, about 2 miles east of downtown. It's a huge facility with hundreds of containers. But here's the problem. It's heavily guarded, and some of those guards are armed. I stared at the map, trying to figure out how I could possibly get into a guarded shipping facility to look for my daughter. It seemed impossible, but I had to try. There's something else, Tommy said quietly. Yesterday, I overheard 2 guys talking at a gas station. One of them mentioned that Vincent Morales was planning to clean house this weekend. Said something about getting rid of evidence before the heat got too intense. My blood turned to ice. What kind of evidence? Tommy's expression was grim. I think you know what kind. I sat back in the booth trying to process everything he had told me. Clara was being held in a shipping container at a heavily guarded facility. She was part of a human trafficking operation run by someone named Vincent Morales, with Antonio as one of his employees. And they were planning to kill her and the other women this weekend to eliminate evidence. I have to go to the police, I said. Tommy shook his head. Your daughter's note said to be careful who you trust. Vincent Morales has been operating in this city for years without getting caught. That doesn't happen unless he has people on the inside. He was right. If corrupt police officers were involved, going to the wrong person could get Clara killed even faster. What do you think I should do? I asked. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, then sighed heavily. I've been thinking about this for 3 months, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. We have to get her out ourselves. I can't live with myself knowing I could have helped and didn't. That woman trusted me to get a message to you, and I waited 3 months to do it. I'm not making that mistake again. I felt a surge of gratitude toward this young man who barely knew me, but was willing to risk his life to help save my daughter. How would we even get into the shipping yard? I asked. Tommy smiled for the first time since I'd met him. I deliver packages there twice a week. I know the layout, the guard schedules, and where they keep the keys to the containers. It won't be easy, but it's possible. We spent the next hour planning. Tommy would use his legitimate delivery route to get us into the facility. We would wait until the evening shift change, when there was usually a 15-minute window with minimal security coverage. Then we would find container 47B and get Clara and the other women out. It was a dangerous plan with a dozen ways it could go wrong, but it was the only chance my daughter had, and I wasn't going to let her down. As we prepared to leave the diner, Tommy grabbed my arm. There's one more thing you should know. When I saw those women being loaded into the container, I also saw your son-in-law. He was there giving orders to the guards. He's not just involved in this, he's one of the people in charge. The last piece of the puzzle fell into place. Antonio hadn't just discovered Clara's knowledge of the trafficking operation, he was running part of it himself. And now he was planning to murder my daughter to cover his tracks. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated a mother's love and determination to save her child. Tomorrow night, Tommy and I were going to bring Clara home. The next evening, I sat in Tommy's delivery van outside the Riverside Shipping Yard, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. We had spent the entire day going over our plan, but now that we were actually here, the reality of what we were attempting hit me like a freight train. The shipping yard stretched out before us like a metal maze. Hundreds of containers were stacked in neat rows, each one identical to the next. Somewhere in that labyrinth was container 47B, and hopefully, my daughter. Remember, Tommy whispered, checking his watch, the evening shift change happens at 8 o'clock. We have maybe 15 minutes before the new guards finish their rounds and settle into their posts. I nodded, trying to calm my nerves. Tommy had explained that he made legitimate deliveries here twice a week, so the guards knew his van. Our plan was simple in theory. He would drive to his usual delivery spot, and I would slip out and make my way to the container yard while he distracted the guards with paperwork. At exactly 8 o'clock, Tommy started the van and drove through the main gate. The guard barely looked up from his newspaper as we passed. My hands were sweating as we drove deeper into the facility, past rows and rows of shipping containers. There, Tommy pointed to a section of containers near the back of the yard. Row 47 should be over there. Container B would be the second one from the left. He parked near the loading office and got out with his clipboard, walking casually toward the building like he did this every week. I waited 30 seconds, then slipped out of the passenger side and crouched low behind the van. The container yard was dimly lit, with only a few overhead lights casting long shadows between the metal boxes. I stayed in the shadows as much as possible, making my way toward row 47. Every sound made me jump: the distant hum of machinery, the clang of metal settling in the evening air, the occasional voice of a guard making his rounds. When I reached row 47, I counted the containers from the left, container A, then container B. My heart was racing as I approached 47B. It looked exactly like all the others, a large metal box with heavy doors secured by a thick padlock. I pressed my ear against the metal wall and listened. At first, I heard nothing but the sound of my own breathing. Then, faintly, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A woman's voice, weak and muffled, calling for help. "Clara?" I whispered as loudly as I dared. "Clara, is that you?" The voice stopped, then came back stronger. "Mom? Mom, is that really you?" I started crying right there in the shipping yard. It was Clara's voice, weak and hoarse, but definitely my daughter. "Yes, baby, it's me. I'm here to get you out." "Mom, there are 4 of us in here." Clara's voice was urgent but quiet. "We're all chained up, and the guards check on us every few hours. You have to be careful." I looked at the heavy padlock securing the container doors. Tommy had said he knew where they kept the keys, but I didn't see him anywhere. I was starting to panic when I heard footsteps approaching. I ducked behind the next container just as a guard walked past, flashlight in hand. He was a big man with a scar on his neck, the same man Tommy had described seeing at the warehouse. He stopped at container 47B and listened for a moment, then continued his patrol. After he was gone, I crept back to the container. "Clara, I'm going to get you out, but I need to find the keys first. Can you tell me anything about the guard's schedule?" "They come by every 2 hours," Clara whispered back. "The next check should be around 10 o'clock. Mom, you need to know something. Antonio is supposed to come here tonight." I heard the guards talking about it. "He's bringing someone called Vincent to inspect us before they move us to the final location." My stomach dropped. If Antonio was coming here tonight, our window of opportunity was even smaller than we thought. I had to find Tommy and get those keys immediately. I made my way back toward the loading office, staying in the shadows. Through the window, I could see Tommy talking to 2 guards, showing them paperwork and acting like everything was normal. But I could tell from his body language that he was nervous. I waited behind a stack of pallets until one of the guards left to make his rounds. Then I crept closer to the office window and tapped gently on the glass. Tommy saw me and nodded slightly, then said something to the remaining guard about needing to check his van for a missing package. He came outside and walked casually toward his van, with me following at a distance. When we were out of earshot of the office, he turned to me with a worried expression. "Did you find her?" he asked. "Yes, she's in 47B with 3 other women. But we have a problem. Antonio is coming here tonight with someone named Vincent. We need to move fast." Tommy's face went pale. "Vincent Morales is coming here? Tonight?" "You know him?" "I've seen him around the docks. He's bad news, Maggie. Really bad news. If he's coming to inspect the women, that means they're planning to move them soon." Then we need those keys now, I said urgently. Tommy nodded and led me around to the back of the loading office. There was a small window that was slightly open, probably for ventilation. The key cabinet is right inside this window, he whispered. I can reach it if I climb up. He boosted himself up to the window and carefully reached inside. I kept watch, my heart pounding every time I heard a sound. After what felt like forever, Tommy pulled his arm back out with a ring of keys in his hand. Got them, he whispered, dropping back down to the ground. We hurried back toward container 47B, but as we approached row 47, I saw headlights turning into the shipping yard. A black SUV was driving slowly through the container rows, as if the driver was looking for something specific. Hide! Tommy hissed, pulling me behind a container. The SUV stopped near container 47B, and 2 men got out. Even in the dim light, I recognized one of them immediately, Antonio. The other man was older, well-dressed, with graying hair and cold eyes. This had to be Vincent Morales. Are they ready for transport? Vincent asked, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. Yes, sir, Antonio replied. 4 packages, all secured and ready to move to the final location. Vincent walked to the container and banged on the metal wall with his fist. Ladies, I hope you've enjoyed your stay because you're about to take a little trip. I heard Clara's voice from inside the container, weak but defiant. You can't keep doing this to people. Someone will find us. Vincent laughed, a cold sound that made my skin crawl. Nobody's looking for you anymore, sweetheart. As far as the world knows, you're working overseas, remember? Antonio pulled out his phone and made a call. Rico, bring the truck around. We're moving the packages tonight. My mind was racing. If they moved Clara and the other women tonight, we might never find them again. Tommy and I had to act now, while Vincent and Antonio were distracted. Tommy seemed to be thinking the same thing. He showed me the keys and pointed toward the back of the container. I'll create a distraction, he whispered. When they go to investigate, you unlock the container and get the women out. Before I could protest, Tommy picked up a piece of metal pipe and threw it hard against a container 3 rows away. The loud clang echoed through the shipping yard. What was that? Vincent snapped. I'll check it out, Antonio said, pulling out a gun and heading toward the sound. Vincent stayed by the container, but he was looking in the direction Antonio had gone. This was my chance. I crept around to the back of container 47B and tried the first key. It didn't fit. I tried the second key, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. The third key slid into the lock and turned. I heard the mechanism click open and I carefully removed the padlock. The container doors were heavy, but I managed to pull one of them open just enough to slip inside. The smell hit me first. Unwashed bodies, fear, and something else I didn't want to identify. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw them. 4 women, chained to the walls of the container, all looking at me with a mixture of hope and terror. Clara was on the far left, and even in the dim light, I could see she had lost weight and had bruises on her face and arms, but her eyes were alert and determined. "Mom," she whispered. Tears streaming down her face. I rushed to her and tried to examine the chains holding her to the wall. They were secured with smaller padlocks, and I started trying keys from Tommy's ring. "The other women," Clara whispered urgently. "We have to get them all out." I nodded and moved to the next woman, a young blonde who looked like she couldn't be more than 20. She was unconscious or heavily drugged. The third woman was awake but seemed to be in shock, staring straight ahead without responding to anything. The fourth woman was older, maybe in her 30s, and she grabbed my arm when I approached. "Please," she whispered. "I have children. I just want to go home to my children." "We're going to get you all out," I promised, working frantically with the keys. I had just unlocked Clara's chains when I heard voices getting closer outside. Antonio was coming back and he sounded angry. "There's nothing over there," he was saying. "Probably just a cat or something." "Well, let's get this done," Vincent replied. "I want them moved to the boat within the hour. Clara grabbed my arm. "Mom, you have to go. If they find you here, they'll kill you too." "I'm not leaving without you," I said firmly, moving to unlock the next woman's chains. But before I could get the key in the lock, the container door swung open wide, flooding the space with light from Vincent's flashlight. He stood in the doorway with Antonio beside him, both men staring at me in shock. "Well, well," Vincent said slowly, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "It looks like we have an unexpected visitor." Antonio's face was a mask of rage and panic. "Maggie, what the hell are you doing here?" I stood up slowly, positioning myself between the men and the women. "I'm taking my daughter home." Vincent laughed. "I don't think so, Grandma. In fact, I think you just volunteered to join our little shipping operation." He nodded to Antonio, who stepped into the container with his gun drawn. "Chain her up with the others. Looks like we're shipping 5 packages tonight instead of 4. As Antonio approached me with a set of chains, I heard a sound that filled me with hope. Police sirens in the distance, getting closer by the second. Tommy had called for backup. Vincent heard the sirens too, and his expression changed from amusement to fury. "You brought the cops here?" "I brought justice," I said, looking him straight in the eye. The sirens were getting louder and I could see flashing lights reflecting off the metal containers. Vincent cursed and grabbed Antonio's arm. "We're leaving, now." "What about the packages?" Antonio asked. "Forget them. We'll start over somewhere else." But as they turned to run, Tommy appeared in the container doorway, no longer the nervous young man I had met at the diner. He was holding a gun and wearing a police vest. "Vincent Morales and Antonio Rodriguez, you're under arrest," he said calmly. "And before you think about running, this place is surrounded." As if to prove his point, armed police officers appeared behind him, their weapons drawn and pointed at Vincent and Antonio. I sank to my knees in relief as the police took the 2 men into custody. Clara was free, the other women were going to be rescued, and the nightmare was finally over. But as I held my daughter in my arms for the first time in 2 years, I realized that Tommy had been more than just a helpful delivery driver. He had been an undercover police officer all along, working to bring down Vincent Morales' trafficking operation. And my daughter's desperate message had been the key that finally unlocked the case. The next few hours passed in a blur of flashing lights, police questions, and overwhelming relief. I sat in the back of an ambulance while paramedics checked my vitals, my eyes never leaving Clara as she received medical attention a few feet away. Detective Patricia Williams approached me, her face serious but kind. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to ask you some questions, but only when you're ready." I nodded weakly. "I think I know more than you might expect." As we talked, I told her everything, the package Tommy had delivered, discovering the basement in Antonio's house, the hidden phone with its incriminating messages, and Tommy's revelation about the trafficking operation. Detective Williams listened intently, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification. "Tommy Chen is one of my best officers," she said when I finished. "He went undercover 8 months ago after we received anonymous tips about suspicious activity at the shipping docks. His cover was perfect. He really did work as a delivery driver for Metro Express." So everything he told me was true. All of it except one thing. Detective Williams smiled slightly. "He wasn't supposed to make contact with you until we had the operation wrapped up. But Clara's note changed everything. When Tommy saw an opportunity to get that package to you, he took it, even though it blew his cover." I thought about the nervous young man who had approached me at the farmer's market, looking over his shoulder for danger. He had been terrified, but he had done the right thing anyway. "The other women," I asked, "the ones in the container with Clara, are they going to be okay?" "3 of them are at the hospital now," Detective Williams replied. "They're weak and traumatized, but they're alive. Their families have been notified and we're assigning victim advocates to help them." As the night wore on, I watched police officers loading evidence bags into their cars. Antonio and Vincent Morales were in handcuffs, being loaded into separate police vehicles. Antonio caught my eye as they led him past me, and his expression was unreadable, a mixture of anger, resignation, and something that might have been regret. "Why?" I asked him quietly as they walked by. "She was your wife. How could you do this to her?" Antonio stopped and looked at me for a long moment. "Your daughter was a mistake from the beginning," he said coldly. "She started asking too many questions about my business. She found documents she wasn't supposed to see. I didn't have a choice." "You always had a choice," I replied, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "You chose money over family. You chose cruelty over love." Antonio laughed bitterly. "Love is for fools who don't understand how the world works, Maggie. You'll learn that eventually." They led him away, and I watched until he was out of sight. The anger didn't fade, but something else replaced it. A sense of peace that I hadn't felt in 2 long years. The nightmare was finally over, and my daughter was safe. Clara was discharged from the hospital after a few hours of observation. The doctors said she was severely dehydrated and malnourished, and she had multiple injuries that would take weeks to heal. But she was going to be okay. She was weak and tired, but she was alive. I drove her to my house, neither of us saying much. There would be time for explanations later, for questions and answers and processing everything that had happened. For now, we just needed to be together. At home, I made Clara a cup of tea and sat with her on the couch, both of us wrapped in blankets. She looked around my living room like she was seeing it for the first time. "I missed this place," she said softly. "I missed you." "I'm right here, sweetheart," I replied, taking her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." Clara was quiet for a moment, then she started talking. She told me everything. How she had discovered Antonio's involvement with Vincent Morales by accident, finding documents in his briefcase that detailed the trafficking operation, how she had confronted him, and how his reaction had terrified her. "He didn't even try to deny it," Clara said, her voice hollow. "He just looked at me like I was a problem that needed to be solved." That's when I knew he was going to kill me. I held her hand tighter as she continued. She described how he had drugged her, how he had kept her chained in the basement, moving her to different locations whenever he worried she might be found. She told me about the other women she had met, women who had been taken from their families and sold like cargo. "I tried to escape 3 times, Clara whispered. "Each time they caught me and punished me. The last time Antonio said I was getting too risky, that they were going to get rid of me permanently." "But you didn't give up," I said. "You found a way to get that note to me." Clara smiled weakly. "Tommy was my last hope. I saw him through that window at the warehouse, and I knew he was young enough to still have a conscience. I prayed he would be brave enough to help." "He was," I assured her. "He was very brave." The next morning, Detective Williams came to my house with more news. The investigation had uncovered even more than we had expected. Vincent Morales had been running a sophisticated trafficking operation for years, moving women through a network of warehouses and shipping containers. Antonio had been one of his top lieutenants for the past 3 years. "We've arrested 12 people so far," Detective Williams reported. "Drivers, guards, even a few corrupt officials who were helping them stay under the radar. But we're still looking for more." "What about the women?" I asked. "Are there others being held somewhere?" "We found records indicating there were more women at other locations," Detective Williams admitted. "We're conducting raids at 5 different sites as we speak. Hopefully we'll find more survivors." Clara sat quietly during this conversation, but I could see the hope in her eyes. For every woman rescued, another family might get their loved one back. "Mrs. Thompson," Detective Williams continued, "we need Clara's testimony to help build our case. She's a crucial witness to what happened inside the organization." Clara straightened her shoulders. "I'll do whatever I can to help. These women, I can't let what happened to me happen to anyone else." Over the following days, Clara worked with the police, giving detailed statements and helping them identify the people involved in the trafficking ring. She recognized several men from photographs, guards, drivers, and others who had been part of her imprisonment. Tommy visited us at my house out of his delivery uniform now and wearing plain clothes. He looked different without the nervous demeanour I had first noticed at the farmer's market, more confident, more at ease. "I wanted to thank you personally," he said to Clara. "Your note gave us the break we needed. We'd been investigating Morales for months, but we couldn't find his main operation. You gave us the key." Clara shook her head. "I didn't do anything, I just wrote a note." "You did more than that," Tommy replied. "You survived, and you made sure your mother knew the truth. That took more courage than most people will ever show in their entire lives." As Tommy was leaving, Detective Williams called with news that the raids had been successful. 3 more women had been rescued from locations across the city, and the investigation was expanding to neighbouring states. "There's still a lot of work to do," Detective Williams said, "but we've permanently crippled this operation. A lot of women are going to get to go home because of what you and your daughter did." That night, Clara and I sat on my back porch looking up at the stars. It was a clear night, and the sky was filled with more stars than I had noticed in a long time. "Do you think things will ever feel normal again?" Clara asked quietly. I put my arm around her shoulders. "I don't know, sweetheart. What happened to you was terrible, and it will always be part of your story. But it doesn't have to define the rest of your life. You survived, and now you have the chance to build something new." Clara leaned her head on my shoulder. "I'm scared, Mom. I'm scared of Antonio getting out of prison someday. I'm scared of seeing someone who looks like one of the guards. I'm scared that I'll never feel safe again." "Those feelings are normal," I told her. "They'll probably never go away completely, but they won't always be this strong. With time, you'll learn to live with what happened, and you'll find that you're stronger than you ever imagined." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us lost in our thoughts. Finally, Clara spoke again. "Mom, I want to help. I want to work with the other survivors, maybe volunteer at a women's shelter or something. I can't just go back to my old life and pretend none of this happened." I smiled, though tears were streaming down my face. "That's my girl. Whatever you decide to do, I'll support you every step of the way." The next morning, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found a young woman standing on my porch, one of the women who had been rescued from the shipping container. She was accompanied by her mother, who was crying with relief. "Clara saved my life," the young woman said simply. "When the police came, she made sure they found me first. She told them I was in the worst shape and needed help immediately. I just wanted to say thank you." Clara came to the door and embraced the young woman, both of them crying. In that moment, I saw something change in my daughter's eyes, the beginning of healing, the first steps toward reclaiming her life. More visitors came throughout the day, families whose loved ones had been rescued, wanting to express their gratitude, news reporters wanting to tell the story, which Detective Williams approved because it might help other victims come forward, a representative from a women's advocacy group offering support services. By evening I was exhausted, but my heart was full. Clara sat beside me on the couch, looking tired but more at peace than I had seen her since before her disappearance. "You know what I realized today?" she said. "I spent 2 years being a victim, but today I got to be something else. I got to be a survivor. I got to help other people." "That's who you've always been," I told her. "Since you were a little girl, you were always taking care of other people. That's just who you are." Clara smiled, and for the first time in 2 years, it reached her eyes. "I'm going to be okay, Mom. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, I'm going to be okay." I held her close, grateful for this moment, grateful that she was alive, grateful that we had somehow found our way back to each other against all odds. The road ahead would be long, but we would walk it together. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making Clara's favourite pot roast, the same recipe I had been preparing that Thursday evening 2.5 years ago when Antonio first told me she had gone overseas. But this time, Clara was actually here, sitting at my kitchen table, helping me peel potatoes and telling me about her day at the Victim Advocacy Centre where she now worked. The road to recovery hadn't been easy. Clara had spent 3 weeks in the hospital, not just for her physical injuries but for the psychological evaluation and initial trauma counselling that Detective Williams had insisted upon. When she finally came home with me, she barely spoke for the first month. She would wake up screaming from nightmares, couldn't bear to be in small enclosed spaces, and jumped at every unexpected sound. But slowly, with the help of an excellent therapist and more love and patience than I knew I possessed, my daughter started to come back to me. Not the same Clara who had disappeared 2 years ago. That innocent, trusting young woman was gone forever. This Clara was stronger, more cautious, but also more determined to make sure what happened to her never happened to anyone else. "Mrs. Patterson called today," Clara said, referring to one of the other trafficking survivors she had been working with. "She got the job at the bank. It's just part-time to start, but it's a real job with benefits and everything." I smiled, feeling the same pride I always felt when Clara told me about the women she was helping. "That's wonderful. How many does that make now?" 15 women who've found stable employment, 8 who've been reunited with their families, and 3 who've started college programs. Clara's voice was filled with satisfaction. "And the best part is, Vincent Morales and his whole organization are never getting out of prison to hurt anyone else." The trial had been difficult for Clara. She'd had to testify about her captivity, relive the trauma in front of a courtroom full of strangers, and face Antonio across the witness stand. But her testimony, combined with the evidence Tommy had gathered during his undercover operation, had resulted in life sentences for both Morales and Antonio, plus lengthy prison terms for 12 other members of their trafficking network. Tommy, Officer Thomas Chen, had become a regular visitor to our house over the past few months. What had started as professional check-ins to see how Clara was adjusting had gradually become something more personal. He was patient with Clara's healing process, understanding about her bad days, and genuinely committed to the anti-trafficking work that had brought them together. "Speaking of Tommy," Clara said with a small smile, "he's coming for dinner tonight, right?" "He should be here any minute," I confirmed, checking the roast in the oven. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Clara had asked Tommy to dinner tonight because she wanted to tell him something important. After months of therapy and soul-searching, she had decided she was ready to take the next step in her recovery, moving back into her own place and starting to rebuild her independent life. The front doorbell rang and Clara went to answer it. I heard Tommy's voice in the hallway, warm and familiar, followed by Clara's laughter. It was a sound I had thought I might never hear again, and it filled my heart with joy every time. "Something smells amazing in here," Tommy said as they came into the kitchen. He had traded his delivery uniform for jeans and a sweater, but he still had the same kind eyes that had given me hope that day at Murphy's Diner. "Maggie's famous pot roast," Clara said, "the same meal she was making the night Antonio first lied to her about me being overseas." It had taken Clara a long time to be able to talk about Antonio without anger or fear. Her therapist said it was a sign of healing that she could now mention him matter-of-factly as just another part of her story rather than the defining trauma of her life. Over dinner, we talked about Clara's work at the Advocacy Centre, Tommy's new assignment with the police department's human trafficking task force, and my own volunteer work with families of missing persons. The 3 of us had become an unlikely family, bound together by the worst experience of our lives, but determined to turn that experience into something positive. "I have something I want to tell you both," Clara said as we finished eating. She took a deep breath the way she always did when she was about to say something difficult. "I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I've talked it over with Dr. Martinez. I think I'm ready to get my own apartment again." I felt a mix of pride and worry. I had known this day would come, but I wasn't sure I was ready to let Clara out of my sight again. "Are you sure?" I asked gently. "There's no rush. You can stay here as long as you need to." Clara reached across the table and took my hand. "Mum, you saved my life. Not just by finding me in that shipping container, but by giving me a safe place to heal these past 6 months. But I need to prove to myself that I can be independent again. I can't let what Antonio did to me control the rest of my life. Tommy nodded approvingly. That takes a lot of courage, Clara. How can we support you? Well, Clara said with a shy smile, I was hoping you might help me look at apartments this weekend. I want something close to Mom's house, but with good security and maybe a roommate situation so I'm not completely alone. We spent the rest of the evening looking at apartment listings online and talking about Clara's plans for the future. She wanted to go back to school to get a degree in social work, specializing in trauma counseling for trafficking survivors. She also wanted to continue her advocacy work and maybe eventually write a book about her experience to help other families going through similar situations. As Tommy was getting ready to leave, Clara pulled him aside for a private conversation. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw her hand him a small wrapped package. When he opened it, his face showed surprise and emotion. It was Clara's wedding ring, the same ring that had been in the package that started this whole journey. But now, instead of being a symbol of her captivity and Antonio's lies, Clara had had it melted down and reformed into a simple pendant with an inscription, Survivor. I want you to have this, Clara told him, not because of any romantic feelings, but because you were the bridge between my captivity and my freedom. You risked your life to deliver my message to Mom, and you helped save not just me but all those other women. Tommy was clearly moved. Clara, I can't accept this. It's too valuable, too personal. Please, Clara insisted, it's important to me that you have it. Every time you look at it, remember that the work you do matters. Remember that there are families out there who need someone like you to care enough to take risks and do the right thing. After Tommy left, Clara and I sat on the couch together, looking through photo albums from before her disappearance. It was something we had started doing recently as part of her therapy, reclaiming the happy memories that Antonio's betrayal had tainted. Mom, Clara said quietly, I need you to know something. When I was in that shipping container, when I thought I was going to die, the thing that kept me going was knowing that you would never stop looking for me. Even when the guards told me that everyone thought I was overseas, even when Antonio convinced me that you believed his lies, I knew in my heart that you would figure out the truth eventually. I felt tears starting in my eyes. I almost didn't figure it out in time. If that delivery driver hadn't found you, if you hadn't been brave enough to get that package to him. But you did figure it out, Clara interrupted. And when it mattered most, when I needed you to be strong and smart and brave, you were all of those things. You saved my life, Mom. You and Tommy and all the other people who refused to give up. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us thinking about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The package that had shattered my world 6 months ago had ultimately been the key to putting it back together again. There's one more thing, Clara said, pulling out a letter from her purse. I wrote this for you, but I wasn't sure when to give it to you. I think tonight is the right time. I opened the letter with trembling hands. It was written in Clara's neat handwriting, so different from the desperate scrawl I had found in Antonio's basement. Dear Mom, I know I can never fully explain what it was like to be trapped in that nightmare for 2 years, knowing that the person I trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the worst possible way. But I also can't explain what it was like to see your face in that shipping container. To know that despite everything Antonio had done to convince you I was safe overseas, you had figured out the truth and come to save me. You taught me that a mother's love is stronger than any lie, any deception, any evil that people can do to each other. You showed me that even when everything seems hopeless, even when the people we trust betray us, there are still good people in the world who will fight for what's right. I'm not the same person I was before this happened, and I never will be. But I'm not broken either. I'm stronger, more determined, and more grateful for the people who love me than I ever was before. and that's because of you. Thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for being brave when I couldn't be. Thank you for showing me that even the darkest situations can't destroy the bond between a mother and daughter. I love you more than words can say. Your daughter, Clara. By the time I finished reading, we were both crying, but they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that wash away pain and leave room for hope. I love you too, sweetheart, I whispered, holding her close. And I'm so proud of the woman you've become. As we got ready for bed that night, I thought about how much our lives had changed since that Tuesday morning at the farmer's market. The package that had contained Clara's wedding ring and her desperate plea for help had led us through the darkest period of our lives, but it had also led us to this moment, sitting in my kitchen making plans for the future, surrounded by people who cared about us. Clara was right. She wasn't the same person she had been before Antonio's betrayal, but she was stronger, more compassionate, and more determined to make a difference in the world. And our relationship, tested by 2 years of lies and 6 months of healing, was stronger than it had ever been. The nightmare was truly over. The package that had changed everything had ultimately given us back everything that mattered: each other, hope for the future, and the knowledge that love really can conquer even the darkest evil. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I said a silent prayer of gratitude for nervous delivery drivers who choose to do the right thing, for undercover police officers who risk their lives to save strangers, and for daughters who are brave enough to fight for their freedom even in the darkest circumstances. But mostly I was grateful for the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter, and for the package that had reminded us both that no matter how lost we might seem, love will always find a way to bring us home.